He was a powerful millionaire who had everything except peace at home. One night, he snapped and said the words no wife ever wants to hear. "I can't stand her anymore." The next morning, she vanished without a trace. But what she left behind wasn't anger or revenge. It was something so unexpected it brought this cold, unshakable man to his knees. Before I begin the story, I'd like to say a quick prayer for you, my dear family. May your days be filled with peace, your heart with joy, and your steps guided by light. Amen. If you're happy to be here, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a story. The chandelier above the grand dining hall flickered in the storm's shadow, its crystals scattering fractured light across marble floors, polished to a mirror sheen. Adrian Cole sat at the head of the long oak table, his cufflinks glinting with the subtle arrogance of a man who had earned everything he owned. To the outside world, he was untouchable, 38 years old, a self-made millionaire whose name opened doors in the city's wealthiest circles. But at this table, in the silence of his own mansion, even Adrian felt the weight of something slipping through his hands. Across from him, Isabella Cole lowered her gaze to the untouched meal before her. She had always been the picture of poise, dark hair falling in soft waves past her shoulders, amber eyes that once glowed with laughter now dulled into resignation. At 32, she still carried the beauty of her youth, but the sparkle had drained away, leaving only a hollow grace. The storm outside pressed against the windows, as if demanding entry into the battlefield of their marriage. Adrian tapped his glass of wine against the table. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was deliberate, an accusation unspoken. "You didn't say a word at dinner tonight," he said finally, his tone smooth but edged with steel. "Do you enjoy embarrassing me in front of my associates?" Isabella's lips parted slightly, then closed again. The silence was louder than any insult. Adrian leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Don't play the mute wife, Isabella. Not when the entire board can see it." Her hands tightened in her lap, hidden under the table. She wanted to tell him she hadn't spoken because she was tired of being ignored, because she was tired of being a decorative piece in his glittering empire. But the words stuck, trapped behind years of learned restraint. Instead, she said quietly, "They don't come to dinners to hear me, Adrian. They come to see you." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, guilt, maybe, or something softer. But it vanished almost as quickly as it came. He leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "You always twist things, don't you? Always make me the villain." Lightning tore across the sky, illuminating Isabella's face. Her jaw was set, but her eyes glistened. She rose slowly, the hem of her silk dress brushing against the floor. "I'm not twisting anything," she said, her voice firmer now. "I'm just tired." Adrian's hand slammed against the table, rattling the crystal glasses. "Tired of what? Tired of living in comfort? Tired of wearing diamonds? Tired of being married to a man who gave you everything?" Her gaze lifted to his, and for the first time in months, he saw fire behind those eyes. "You gave me everything," she whispered, "except the one thing that mattered, you." The words struck him harder than any physical blow. But Adrian Cole was not a man who knew how to lose ground. He rose too, looming over her, his 6-foot frame casting her into shadow. "I can't stand this anymore," he said through clenched teeth. "I can't stand you." The storm roared in agreement as thunder cracked overhead. Isabella flinched, not at the words, but at the finality in his voice. She stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest, but her expression held no fear, only a strange calmness, the calmness of a decision long made. "You'll regret saying that," she murmured. Then, without another word, Isabella turned and walked out of the dining hall, her heels clicking against the marble like a countdown to something inevitable. Adrian stood frozen, staring at the empty doorway long after she vanished into the storm-filled night. For the first time, the mansion felt too large, too hollow, too quiet. The rain beat against the window of Isabella's bedroom like impatient fingers, demanding she listen to the storm outside. She sat at her vanity, the glow of a single lamp softening the sharp planes of her face. In the mirror, her reflection looked foreign, eyes shadowed, lips pressed into a tight line, shoulders weighed down by words never spoken. Isabella lifted the silver hairbrush from the table and drew it slowly through her dark hair. The motion was mechanical, the ritual of a woman who had learned long ago that silence was safer than confrontation. But tonight, his words echoed in her chest like shattered glass. "I can't stand you." The phrase replayed again and again, until it was no longer just his voice but her own internal echo, the poison settling deeper each time. Her hand stilled. She set the brush down, fingers trembling slightly, and opened the small drawer beneath the mirror. Inside lay folded sheets of paper, her hidden refuge, letters written late at night, inked with emotions she could never release into the air. They were never meant to be sent. They were her confessions to the emptiness. She unfolded one, the edges already worn. "Adrian," it began, her handwriting neat, but pressed with force. "Do you ever wonder when we lost each other? Was it the night you stayed late at the office and didn't notice I had waited at the table with dinner growing cold? Was it the morning I tried to tell you about my dreams and you dismissed them as childish? Or was it simply the day you decided the man who built empires had no time to nurture a heart?" Her eyes blurred with unshed tears. She read further. "I promised myself I would not become like my mother, a woman who buried her voice for the sake of peace. But each day with you, I feel myself shrinking smaller, like a shadow in my own home. I want to scream, but I'm afraid you would only call it noise." Isabella pressed the letter to her chest, her breath shaking. These words had never reached him, and maybe they never would. The memory of their early love flickered like a cruel ghost. She remembered Adrian as he had been, standing in that bookshop years ago, sleeves rolled up, a novel in his hands. He wasn't the millionaire then, just a man with sharp eyes and an easy smile, quoting poetry to impress her. She had laughed and really laughed, her heart rushing toward him before she could stop it. What had happened to that man? What had happened to them? A knock at her door jolted her back. The housemaid's muffled voice filtered through. "Madam, do you need anything?" "No," Isabella said softly. "Nothing at all." The footsteps retreated, leaving her alone with the storm and her silence. She slid the letter back into the drawer, but her hand lingered on the stack of folded pages. Each one was a piece of herself she had hidden away, as though saving fragments of her soul from disintegration. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and fragile. For a fleeting moment, she hated the woman in the mirror, the woman who had let herself be silenced, who had traded laughter for endurance. Then she whispered to the empty room, "No more." The storm outside answered with a thunderclap, as if promising that the silence would not last forever. Meanwhile, in his study at the far end of the mansion, Adrian Cole poured himself another drink. The glass clinked against a decanter, the amber liquid glowing under lamplight. His mind replayed Isabella's last words. He'll regret saying that. He told himself it was meaningless, just another attempt at drama. But why had it unsettled him? Why did he feel that something had shifted in the air, like the storm had carried away more than just rain? Adrian was not a man who doubted himself. He had conquered industries, defeated competitors, turned failures into stepping stones. Yet tonight, with bourbon burning his throat, he felt strangely hollow. The silence of the house pressed in on him. Normally, he relished silence. It meant control, discipline, order. But this silence was different. It felt like absence. It felt like a warning. He set the glass down with force, gripping the edge of the desk. "She'll be back," he muttered under his breath, as though speaking it aloud would make it true. But somewhere deep inside, where his pride couldn't shield him, Adrian knew the silence was not empty. It was a prelude. The Cole mansion glittered with chandeliers and laughter that wasn't real. Another charity gala. Another evening of polished smiles and forced conversations. To the city's elite, Adrian and Isabella Cole were a picture of refinement, a power couple draped in wealth, their presence commanding attention wherever they walked. But behind the curated perfection lay fractures invisible to the public eye. Isabella walked at Adrian's side, her gown a flowing cascade of midnight blue silk. Diamonds glittered at her neck, a necklace chosen not by her, but by Adrian's secretary. Another detail arranged for appearances. Her smile was practiced, the kind that reached the lips, but never the eyes. "Mr. Cole," a senator greeted, shaking Adrian's hand with a grin too wide. "And your lovely wife always radiant." Adrian returned the smile effortlessly. "We're honored to be here." Isabella inclined her head politely, offering a soft word of greeting. But inside she felt like a mannequin placed beside him, an accessory to complete the picture. As the evening dragged on, Isabella drifted toward the balcony, craving air beyond the perfume and politics. She leaned against the railing, the city stretching beneath her like a constellation of lights. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to disappear into that vastness, to shed the name Mrs. Adrian Cole, and become simply Isabella again. Her reverie broke when she heard laughter behind her. Adrian stood a few steps away, glass in hand, speaking animatedly with a young woman in a crimson dress. She recognized her, Adrian's new assistant. The woman's laughter tinkled too loudly, her hand brushing Adrian's sleeve with a familiarity that stung. Adrian caught Isabella's gaze for a fleeting second. His smile faltered, then tightened, as though daring her to make a scene. She didn't. She turned back to the city lights, swallowing the ache rising in her chest. Later that night, the mansion's heavy doors closed on the last of their guests. The silence returned, thicker than the velvet curtains draped across the windows. Adrian loosened his tie, pouring himself another drink. Isabella entered the room, her gown still shimmering in the dim light. She stood across from him, her expression unreadable. "You enjoyed yourself," she said finally, her voice calm but edged. Adrian glanced at her, brow arched. "It was business, Isabella. That's what these nights are." "Business?" she repeated, her tone flat. "You made it look personal." His glass slammed onto the table, the sound sharp against the quiet. "For God's sake, must you always find something to complain about?" "I wasn't complaining," she replied softly. "I was watching." Her composure only fueled his frustration. He had expected fire, accusation, even tears. Instead, she gave him silence, and silence felt like condemnation. "Do you have any idea what I carry on my shoulders every day?" Adrian demanded, stepping closer. "The meetings, the negotiations, the endless pressure to keep this empire running? Do you think it's easy?" "I never said it was easy," Isabella answered, her voice steady. "I only said it was lonely." The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Adrian's jaw tightened. He was a man who controlled every deal, every outcome, every conversation. But here, with her, he felt something he despised: helplessness. "You knew what this life would be," he snapped. "You chose it." Her eyes, glistening under the lamplight, met his. "I chose you, Adrian. Not the empire, not the parties, not the hollow rooms filled with strangers. I chose you. But somewhere along the way, you disappeared behind your money." His fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to argue, to refute, to remind her of everything he had given her. But the truth in her voice disarmed him. And because he couldn't fight the truth, he lashed out at the only thing he could. "I can't stand this anymore," he hissed, his voice sharp as a blade. "I can't stand you. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Isabella's breath caught, but her face did not crumble. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, her calmness unnerving in its steadiness. "Then don't," she whispered. She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the marble corridor, fading like the last notes of a requiem. Adrian stood alone, the taste of his own words bitter in his mouth. For the first time, he wondered if he had struck not just at her heart, but at the fragile thread still binding them together. Outside, the storm gathered strength. Inside, a different kind of storm was about to begin. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the mansion in an eerie calm. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting golden streaks across the marble floors. For once, the estate felt almost peaceful, yet beneath the silence lurked an absence that Adrian couldn't name. He woke late, his head heavy from too much bourbon, the echoes of last night's words still gnawing at the corners of his mind. "I can't stand you." The phrase haunted him, but pride forced him to cling to it. He told himself he had only spoken the truth. The bed beside him was cold, not unusual. Isabella often slept in the guest room after their arguments, but something about the emptiness today felt different. Adrian showered, dressed, and descended the grand staircase, expecting to find her in the dining room, perhaps sipping tea, with that infuriating calmness she always wore after their fights. Instead, the dining room was vacant. The table was bare, no breakfast laid out, no scent of coffee. The silence pressed in heavier with each step. "Mrs. Cole," he called to the maid polishing silver in the adjoining hall. The woman looked up nervously. "She isn't here, sir." "What do you mean, not here?" She left early this morning." His brow furrowed. "Left? Where to?" The maid hesitated. "She didn't say. She only asked me to see to the house, as usual." Something sharp twisted in his chest, though he brushed it off with irritation. Isabella had left before. Retreats to spas, visits to her sister, excuses to escape their home. She always came back. Always. But as Adrian strode through the halls, he noticed details that unsettled him. In her closet, empty hangers where gowns had hung. The drawer where she kept her jewelry, open, but bare. The vanity, stripped of perfume bottles and brushes. And on the nightstand beside her bed, a single object remained. Her wedding ring. It lay there like a verdict, its diamond glinting cruelly in the morning light. Adrian picked it up, the band cold against his skin, the weight heavier than gold had any right to be. He stared at it for a long time, his jaw tightening, the truth dawning in pieces. Isabella hadn't gone to her sister's. She hadn't gone to a spa. She was gone, truly gone. Adrian set the ring down, his hand trembling before he curled it into a fist. He refused to believe it. She was dramatic, yes, but she would never abandon the life he had built for her. And yet, on the desk in her room sat a small box, wrapped in silk ribbon, his name written across the top in her familiar, graceful script. Adrian. He reached for it, then hesitated. Something in the careful strokes of her handwriting unsettled him. This was not a gift. It was a message. He pulled the ribbon loose, his breath shallow. But when the lid lifted, his courage faltered. Inside, cushioned by velvet, was not jewelry, not money, not some sentimental trinket. It was an envelope, sealed, thick with pages, his name written again on the front. Adrian stared at it, the paper suddenly unbearably heavy in his hand. The air seemed to thicken around him, the silence louder than any storm. For long minutes he did nothing. His pride screamed that he didn't need to read it, that whatever Isabella had to say was irrelevant now. And yet, his hand refused to let go. The letter burned against his palm like truth waiting to be unleashed. But Adrian Cole was not ready. Not yet. He placed it back inside the box, slammed the lid shut, and locked it away in the top drawer of his study desk. Out of sight, out of mind. or so he tried to convince himself, because even as he walked through the cavernous mansion, each echoing footstep reminded him of what he refused to face. The house was no longer empty because of silence. It was empty because Isabella was gone. And for the first time in his life, Adrian Cole had no control. 2 days passed, and still Isabella did not return. The mansion, usually buzzing with staff and social preparations, grew unnervingly quiet. The cooks prepared meals no one ate. The maids moved through the rooms like shadows. And Adrian drowned himself in work, hiding behind contracts and figures, telling himself he was unaffected. But whispers travel faster than truth. At the country club, a colleague raised an eyebrow. Haven't seen Isabella lately. Everything well at home? Adrian's reply was sharp. She's visiting family. The man nodded politely, but his eyes lingered, doubtful. At a luncheon, a socialite leaned closer, lowering her voice. She left the gala early, didn't she? I thought she seemed distressed. Adrian forced a laugh. You imagine too much. But by the time he returned to the mansion, irritation boiled in his veins. He despised speculation. His empire thrived on control, precision, order. And now, because of Isabella's absence, his life felt like a stage where the spotlight burned too hot, too exposing. That evening, Adrian poured himself another glass of bourbon. The same ritual each night since she gone. He stood before the window, looking down at the city lights sprawling beneath him. He told himself he didn't care where she was, but his eyes kept drifting to the drawer in his study, the one where the box sat, the one that held her letter, the unopened letter. It seemed to whisper to him in the quiet, a presence more alive than any human voice. On the third day, his secretary, Harold, entered the office with hesitation. Sir, there's something you should see. He handed Adrian a newspaper. The headline froze him. Where is Isabella Cole? Millionaire's wife missing from public eye. Beneath it, a grainy photograph from the gala. Isabella on the balcony, her face half lit by city lights, her expression distant, almost sorrowful. The caption speculated on marital strain, hinting at separation, even scandal. Adrian's hand tightened around the paper until it crumpled. Rage surged inside him, not at Isabella, not even at the media, but at the fact that control was slipping through his fingers. He had built his empire on power, respect, fear. And now, strangers dared to dissect his private life, to pity him, to suggest weakness. Slamming the newspaper onto his desk, Adrian's eyes flicked once more toward the drawer. The letter. The damn letter. Could it hold answers? Could it silence the noise clawing at his carefully built world? His hand hovered above the drawer handle. Veins taut, breath shallow. But once again pride won. Not yet. Not yet. Meanwhile, in a quiet part of the city, whispers spread beyond headlines. At the library Isabella once frequented, the women who knew her spoke softly between shelves. She always had such a graceful sadness about her. She loved the poetry section. I wonder if she left for good. She deserved more than being an ornament in that cold mansion. Their voices were hushed, almost reverent, like they were speaking of someone who had already passed into memory. But Isabella was not gone, not completely. And what she had left behind in that letter was waiting, patient and devastating, for Adrian to finally open it. The Cole mansion had always been a fortress. Its tall gates, marble pillars, and manicured lawns announced wealth, power, untouchability. But now, for the first time, it felt vulnerable. Reporters gathered near the gates, their cameras flashing each time Adrian's black car swept through. Headlines multiplied. Mystery surrounds Millionaire's missing wife. Perfect marriage or perfect illusion? Sources say Isabella Cole packed her belongings before disappearance. Each article was like a crack in the walls Adrian had spent years constructing. At board meetings, partners eyed him with polite curiosity. Questions left unspoken but heavy in the room. Was the empire as stable as it seemed? If the man at its head couldn't even keep his marriage intact? At night, Adrian tried to drown the noise with bourbon, but silence was louder than the clamor outside. Every evening, his gaze betrayed him. The drawer, the box, the letter. It was no longer just an object. It was a shadow that followed him through the halls, a whisper in every quiet room. He could feel it even when he wasn't near it, as though the words sealed inside pulsed with life, waiting to be released. On the seventh day, Adrian's sister, Margaret, arrived unannounced. She was older, sharp-eyed, and unafraid of him. A rare combination. "You look like hell," she remarked, stepping into his study without invitation. Adrian scowled. "I'm busy." "You're avoiding reality," she countered, settling into a leather chair. "Everyone's talking. The press, society, even my friends at church. Do you want to be remembered as the man whose wife ran away because he couldn't keep a home?" His jaw tightened. "Isabella will come back." Margaret studied him. "And if she doesn't?" The silence stretched, brittle as glass. Her gaze shifted to the desk drawer. She didn't know what was inside, but Adrian's subtle glance betrayed him. "What are you hiding?" she asked softly. "Nothing," he snapped too quickly. Margaret leaned forward. "Adrian, you're my brother. I've seen you face business rivals, politicians, even men twice your power, and you never flinched. But now, you look haunted." Her words struck deeper than he admitted. When she finally left, her perfume lingering faintly in the room, Adrian sat alone in the dim light. His hand drifted once more to the drawer handle, but stopped short. Opening that letter meant surrendering control. It meant letting Isabella have the last word. And Adrian Cole had never surrendered in his life. But dreams are traitors. That night, sleep abandoned him. In the half-light of midnight, he dreamed he saw Isabella standing at the end of their bed, her face pale, her eyes brimming not with anger, but sorrow. She said nothing. She only held out her hand, as if waiting for him to take it. When he reached for her, she vanished into mist, leaving him clutching at empty air. Adrian woke, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding. And though he told himself it was only a dream, his eyes betrayed him yet again, drifting toward the study, toward the drawer, toward the letter he still could not bring himself to open. On the 10th day, the mansion gates opened to a car Adrian did not expect. From the back stepped Helena Brooks, Isabella's elder sister. Unlike Isabella, Helena carried herself with a hard, unyielding presence. Where Isabella was grace, Helena was steel. She didn't wait for a servant to announce her. She marched straight into the grand foyer, her heels echoing sharply against marble floors. Adrian descended the staircase, irritation flaring. "You should have called." Helena's eyes narrowed. "You should have taken care of my sister." The words landed like a slap. "I don't know what you've heard," Adrian began, forcing his tone to remain steady. "But Isabella chose to leave. I had no part in it." Helena crossed her arms, surveying him with cold disdain. "Do you even hear yourself? Everything with you is choice and control, as if people orbit around your will. Isabella wasn't one of your business deals, Adrian. She was a woman, a human being, my sister." Adrian bristled, his pride wounded. She was taken care of. She had everything. Everything but love. The silence between them grew sharp, brittle. Helena's gaze drifted to the study doors, as though drawn by some unseen current. She tilted her head. "What are you hiding in there?" "Nothing," Adrian said too quickly, blocking her path. Her eyes flickered with recognition, like a hunter smelling blood. She didn't press further, at least not aloud, but her stare told him she saw more than he wanted revealed. Before leaving, Helena paused at the door. "If Isabella doesn't return soon, Adrian, I'll make sure the world knows what kind of man you are. And believe me, you won't like the story they tell." The slam of the door echoed long after she was gone. That night, Adrian sat alone in his study, the silence heavier than ever. He poured another drink, but it did nothing to still the storm inside him. Her words repeated in his head, everything but love. His gaze slid, unwilling, toward the drawer. The letter waited, silent, patient, alive. He pressed his palms against the desk, knuckles whitening. He could almost feel Isabella's handwriting beneath the paper, the curves of her script forming words meant to pierce him. He pulled the drawer open. The box lay inside. His fingers brushed the lid, trembling despite himself. But then, with a choked breath, he slammed it shut again. Not tonight. Not yet. In the darkness of his bedroom, Adrian stared at the ceiling, every tick of the clock reminding him of Isabella's absence. And for the first time in his life, he wondered if he was not the master of the game, but the one being played. By the second week of Isabella's disappearance, the whispers had sharpened into open speculation. At luncheons, her absence was no longer politely ignored, but dissected with relish. At the country club, Adrian's name was mentioned not with admiration, but with curiosity, even pity. Perhaps she's gone to Europe, one woman mused. Perhaps she's filed for divorce, another whispered. Perhaps, a man chuckled, she's finally grown tired of being married to a stone. Adrian, seated just within earshot, kept his jaw clenched tight. He smiled when spoken to, nodded at the right times, and gave nothing away. But every word pressed against his skull like hammer blows. Back at Hayes Tower, his empire began to feel the ripple. Investors who once boasted of his unshakable focus now exchanged uneasy glances. Partners whispered behind closed doors. His secretary, Harold, loyal for over a decade, hesitated one evening before leaving. "Sir," he began, his voice low, "forgive me if I overstep, but people are talking. They're saying Mrs. Cole may never return. They're saying—" Adrian's glare froze him in place. "They're saying what?" Harold swallowed. "That perhaps she drove her away." The air between them grew heavy, suffocating. Adrian dismissed him with a flick of his hand, but once alone, the words returned, gnawing. Drove her away. The letter waited. It lived inside the drawer like a caged thing, restless, urgent. Adrian began to feel its weight in every room, even when he wasn't near it. In meetings, he thought of it. At dinners, he saw it in his mind's eye. In the silence of night, it seemed to breathe. He dreamed again of Isabella. This time, she wasn't silent. "You can't bury words, Adrian," she whispered in the dream, her face inches from his. "They will rise. They will haunt. And when they do, you'll collapse beneath their truth." He woke, gasping, his chest heaving like a man who had been underwater too long. The breaking point came on a Friday morning. Adrian entered his office to find Margaret waiting, her face pale with fury. In her hand was the latest newspaper. She slammed it onto his desk. The headline screamed, "Isabella Cole, runaway wife or tragic bride?" Below it, the article recounted every speculation, every whisper, every hint of scandal. There was even a column suggesting Isabella had left behind a letter, a farewell confession, a final truth. Adrian's blood ran cold. The letter. How could anyone know? Margaret's voice was steel. "You may hide from the world, Adrian, but you cannot hide from her words forever. If you truly want to know where Isabella went, if you truly want to understand why she left, open the damn letter." Adrian's hands shook as he folded the paper. He dismissed his sister with no reply, but her words rang louder than the echo of her heels on marble. The letter was no longer a choice. It was an inevitability. The ballroom glittered that evening with chandeliers, silk gowns, and the murmur of high society. It was the annual Langford Foundation Gala, an event Adrian Cole never missed. His presence alone was meant to reassure investors and allies alike. Adrian is untouchable. Adrian is in control. But tonight, As he entered the hall, he felt eyes like daggers. Conversations paused, then shifted into hurried whispers. He caught fragments. Alone again. No wife, no word. Perhaps she's finally escaped. Adrian's jaw clenched as he forced his trademark smile. He shook hands, accepted compliments, and endured pity disguised as politeness. Then came the blow. An old associate, Martin Grayson, slightly drunk, approached with a too loud laugh. "Adrian, my friend, forgive me, but I must ask, did Isabella run off with a poet? A musician? Perhaps someone who could give her what all your money could not?" The laughter around them was low, nervous, but present. Adrian's glass cracked in his hand. Red wine spilled across his cuff, dark like blood. He excused himself with icy calm, retreating from the hall before the mask shattered. The car ride home was silent. The driver dared not speak. Back in the mansion, Adrian walked straight to his study. No lights, no drink, no distractions. The drawer, the box, the letter. His hands hovered above it, trembling not with hesitation now, but with fury, humiliation, desperation. All the whispers, the headlines, the accusations, all of it circled back to this single object. His last tie to Isabella, his final chance to understand. Adrian Cole, who had conquered boardrooms, markets, and rivals, now faced his greatest opponent, a sealed envelope. With a ragged breath, he drew it out and set it on the desk. The paper was cream, the handwriting elegant, familiar. The sight of her hand shook him more than the storm outside his windows. He closed his eyes, the whisper of her voice returning from his dreams. "You can't bury words, Adrian. They will rise." At last, with emotion both tender and violent, Adrian tore the seal. The letter lay open before him, and as his eyes fell upon Isabella's words, the fortress of Adrian Cole began to crumble. The room was silent, but for the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. Each second struck like a hammer against Adrian's ribs. He stared at the pages. Isabella's handwriting curved with a grace that was unmistakably hers, neat, deliberate, touched with elegance. He had watched her write 1,000 times. Little notes tucked into his pocket before meetings, invitations left on the dining table, a shopping list that somehow looked like poetry. But this was different. This was her voice bottled into ink. His hand trembled as he traced the first line without yet reading it. His throat tightened. He poured himself a drink, but the glass never reached his lips. He set it down untouched. Adrian leaned back in his chair, suddenly afraid. Afraid of what she might have confessed. Afraid of what she had left behind. Would he find bitterness? Hatred? Betrayal? Would the words destroy what little image of her he still clung to? He pressed his palm against the page as if to steady it. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. For the first time in his life, he felt small. Memories came unbidden. Isabella at the piano, her laughter brightening the cold marble halls. Isabella in the garden, earth staining her hands as she coaxed life from flowers. Isabella touching his face in the dark, whispering that she saw the man beneath the armor. He had turned away so many times, choosing silence, choosing control, choosing distance. And now she was gone. All that remained of her was this letter. Adrian closed his eyes, gripping the edge of the desk. "I can't stand her anymore." The words he had once spat, careless and cruel, echoed in his head. Words that had pushed her out of his reach. Words that had driven her away. And now, perhaps, those words had written the ending of their story. His heart pounded. He opened his eyes. The letter waited. This time, there would be no retreat. He lowered his gaze and began to read. "My dearest Adrian, by the time you read this, I will already be gone. Do not mistake my absence for hatred. If I hated you, I would have left long ago. Hatred is loud and burning. What lived between us was quieter, more dangerous. It was neglect, Adrian. A silence that grew until it swallowed me whole. I loved you once, more than words can hold. I believed in you when the world doubted. I saw not the empire you built, but the boy behind the walls, the man who ached to be more than his father's shadow. That is the man I married. That is the man I reached for again and again. But somewhere along the way, you locked him away. I cannot remember the last time you looked at me as if I were more than decoration at your side. I cannot recall the last time you asked how my heart was, or what dreams still kept me awake at night. I became a ghost in my own home, alive but unseen. You once told me in anger, I can't stand her anymore. You thought I didn't hear, but I did, and I believed you. Those words hollowed me out, Adrian. They echoed in every corridor, in every sleepless night, until I no longer recognized the woman in the mirror. I am leaving because I cannot die this way. Piece by piece, year by year, erased by the man I love. But I am not leaving empty-handed. I carry with me the memory of the man who once reached for me in the dark. The man who whispered poetry against my hair. The man who, for one fleeting moment, let me believe in forever. That man still exists, Adrian. I know he does. I see glimpses of him in your quiet sorrow, in the way your hand sometimes trembles when you think no one notices. But I cannot spend my life waiting for him to return. I need air. I need light. I need to be whole again. And yet, before I go, I leave you this truth. Love is not a fortress. It is not built of marble and steel, held together by contracts and appearances. Love is fragile. It needs tending. Words touch risk. You guarded your empire so fiercely that you forgot to guard my heart. If one day you find this letter and you feel nothing, then I was right to leave. But if these words pierce you, if they crack even a corner of the armor you were so proudly, then know this. It is not too late to become the man you once were. Not for me. Perhaps not even for us. But for yourself. Because the greatest tragedy, Adrian, would not be losing me. It would be losing you. Forever yours, Isabella. Adrian's hands shook as the final lines blurred through his tears. He had not wept in years. But now the dam burst. The letter slipped from his grasp, fluttering onto the desk like a white flag of surrender. Adrian Cole, the man of iron, collapsed into his chair. His chest heaved. His empire, his pride, his armor. All of it felt hollow beside the weight of her words. And for the first time in his life, Adrian whispered into silence, Isabella, forgive me. Adrian did not move for hours. The mansion grew dark, but he remained in the study, hunched in his chair, the letter clutched against his chest like a lifeline. Tears stained his face, silent and unrelenting. He had never allowed himself such weakness. Not in public, not even in solitude. But Isabella's words had pierced where no rival, no scandal, no misfortune ever could. He saw her everywhere now. At the piano, her slender fingers coaxing melody from ivory keys. In the library, curled in a chair with a book, a stray curl falling across her cheek. In the garden, sunlight tangled in her hair, her laughter rising like birdsong. Each memory was both balm and blade. He had loved her. He knew that now with a clarity so sharp it cut. But love unspoken, love ungiven, love withheld, it was no love at all. It was starvation. And he had starved her until she fled. The days that followed blurred. Meetings came and went. Decisions were made. But Adrian's mind wandered always back to the letter. He carried it in his pocket, reread it at night, searched it for meanings between the lines. His empire began to falter. His assistants whispered of his distraction. His board grew restless. But none of it mattered, not compared to the gaping wound inside him. One night, as the storm battered against the windows once more, Adrian unfolded the letter again. His eyes lingered on a phrase he had skimmed before. I need air. I need light. I need to be whole again." On the margin, just barely visible, Isabella had scrawled something faintly, almost as though she hadn't meant for him to see it. A fragment. "Where the roses climb." Adrian froze. His heart hammered. The phrase was not random. It was a place. Isabella's mother's old countryside villa. Overgrown, nearly forgotten. She had once told him, years ago, that as a girl she would escape there, climbing the trellises of roses until her hands bled, just to feel alive. Could she have gone there? The letter, then, was not only farewell. It was a trail. Adrian rose from his chair, determination hardening in his chest. For the first time in weeks, he felt something other than despair. He had lost Isabella once. He would not lose her again. Adrian Cole had faced markets collapsing, hostile takeovers, and rivals who would bleed him dry if given a chance. He had always prevailed because he planned, calculated, anticipated every move. But now, as he stood before the countryside on a rain-soaked morning, he realized he had no strategy, only hope. The road twisted through fields gone wild, the air thick with the scent of wet earth. His black car looked absurd here, out of place among mud and stone fences. He had dismissed the driver miles back, needing to walk the last stretch alone. At last, the villa came into view. Time had not been kind to it. The roof sagged in places, ivy climbed unchecked along the walls, and the once white shutters were gray with age. But Adrian's breath caught when his eyes found the garden. There, just as Isabella had written, roses climbed in tangled abundance, clinging stubbornly to trellises as if reaching for the sky. He pushed open the iron gate, its hinges shrieking, and stepped inside. Memories whispered here. He recalled Isabella telling him long ago about the summers she had spent here as a girl, how she would sneak away from lessons, hide beneath the rose arch, and dream of a world that understood her. Now Adrian searched that same arch, hands brushing the petals, as though they might yield a clue. His heart raced with the desperation of a man hunting not for evidence, but for absolution. Inside the villa, dust lay thick, the air tinged with mildew. Furniture stood draped in sheets. Shadows swallowed the corners. Yet on the wooden table in the kitchen, he found something that stopped him cold. A teacup, clean, recently used. Adrian's pulse thundered. She had been here. Perhaps still was. He moved through the rooms, calling softly, "Isabella?" His voice cracked. Silence answered. Then, in the upstairs bedroom, he found another sign. On the vanity, a silver brush lay beside a folded slip of paper. With trembling hands, Adrian opened it. The handwriting was hers. If you came this far, then maybe you still remember what it means to fight. But some distances, Adrian, cannot be crossed by wealth or power. Only by truth. No signature. No location. Just another riddle. Adrian sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching the note. He had followed the roses, and now she was asking for something else, something harder. Truth. But could he bear to speak it? Could he strip himself of the armor he had worn his entire life? For Isabella, for the chance to see her again, he would have to try. The villa was quiet, but Adrian felt as though the walls themselves listened. He sat at the vanity where Isabella's note waited, the faint fragrance of her perfume lingering on the brush beside it. Truth, he muttered, staring at the word she had written. It was not a word he had ever lived by. His world was built on strategy, control, carefully chosen half-truths that kept enemies at bay. He had hidden behind them so long he sometimes forgot what was real. But Isabella had always known. That night he lit a fire in the cold hearth, the flame struggling against years of neglect. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, though it did nothing to warm him. The storm outside grew fierce, lashing the shutters, and in its roar he heard echoes of his father's voice. Feelings make you weak, Adrian. A man who loves is a man who can be broken. For so long he had believed it. He had promised himself he would never be like his father. Yet in his silence, in his distance, he had become worse. At least his father had never pretended to love. Adrian had held Isabella close while keeping his heart locked away. Now she was gone, and he was left with the ruins of both his marriage and his soul. Adrian rose suddenly, pacing the room like a caged animal. His reflection glared back at him from a cracked mirror. Sharp jaw, tailored suit, eyes ringed with exhaustion. A mask, nothing more. "Who are you without the empire?" he whispered to the empty room. For the first time, he admitted the truth aloud. He did not know. Tears burned again unbidden. He pressed his fists to the mantel, bowing his head. "Isabella, I was a coward. I loved you, but I never showed you. I built walls instead of bridges. And when you asked for my heart, I gave you silence." The words tore from him like confession. The fire popped, sparks scattering upward as if carrying his shame away. It was not enough. Not yet. But it was a beginning. When the storm finally eased, Adrian sat at the desk in the villa and pulled out paper, his hands shaking. For years, he had commanded contracts and negotiations with a steady pen. But now each word was agony. Still, he wrote, not as Adrian Cole, the millionaire, but as Adrian, the man who had failed the only woman he had ever loved. The letter began simply, "Isabella, this is my truth. My dearest Isabella, you asked for truth. I have none to give you but this, ugly, unvarnished, and long overdue. I am afraid in ways I never let you see. The empire I built was never about wealth or pride. It was about survival. Every contract signed, every tower raised, every deal struck, it was a shield against poverty, against failure, against the humiliation of being abandoned as a boy. When my father left, I swore no one would ever leave me powerless again. I grew hard, cold. He once told me that I carried storms in my eyes. You were right, but in that storm I lost myself. And in losing myself, I lost you. I cannot erase the nights you lay beside me, waiting for words I never spoke. I cannot return the years you gave me, years I wasted in silence and distance. I cannot undo the wound I carved with that cruel sentence. I can't stand her anymore. You must believe me when I say I never meant it. I was angry at myself, angry at the walls I could not break. But the damage was done. I know those words will echo forever in your heart. I stood before you with every resource, every advantage, and yet I gave you nothing that mattered. And here's the truth that terrifies me most. I loved you. I still love you. I think I always will. But I do not deserve you. Perhaps this letter will never reach you. Perhaps you'll burn it unread. I would deserve that. But if by some grace you read these words, then let them be my offering, my confession, my surrender. I am not asking you to return. I am asking you only to know that beneath the armor, beneath the empire, there is a man who failed you, but who finally sees the cost of his failure. If there is even a sliver of hope, I will spend what remains of my life earning it. Not with wealth, not with grand gestures, but with truth. I have nothing else left to give. Forever yours, Adrian. He folded the letter with trembling hands, sealing it in an envelope, though he had no address. He stared at it for a long time, the silence of the villa pressing down around him. Was it too late? Perhaps. But at least, for the first time in his life, Adrian Cole had spoken the truth. Far from the city's noise and Adrian's empire of glass towers, Isabella lived in quiet seclusion. The cottage stood at the edge of a coastal village, where the sea's voice drowned out memories she longed to forget. Here, days unfolded with simplicity. Mornings tending to the garden, afternoons walking along the cliffs, evenings with only the waves for company. She had thought the ocean might wash him away from her mind. But even here, in this place where the salt air softened her skin and the gulls cried overhead, Adrian's shadow followed. She remembered his eyes, dark, unreadable. His silence that had once felt like strength, but over time became a chasm. His words the night she left still cut, like shards of glass. I can't stand her anymore. That wound had nearly broken her, and yet the wound had also freed her. On this particular morning, Isabella sat at the worn wooden desk in her rented room, the sun streaming through lace curtains. She had been writing in her journal, scribbled lines of poetry, fragments of thoughts, little attempts to reclaim her voice. Her pen stilled when the innkeeper tapped gently at her door. "Mrs. Cole," the woman said softly. Though Isabella never corrected her to Mississippi, "a letter has arrived for you. No return address." Isabella's breath caught. She had told no one where she had gone. Not even her closest friends knew. Her hands trembled as she took the envelope. The handwriting was unmistakable, firm, elegant, yet uncharacteristically uneven, as though written with shaking hands. Adrian. She did not open it right away. She carried it to the cliffs, needing the vast horizon as her witness. The wind tugged at her hair, the sea roared below, and still the envelope weighed heavy in her palm. At last she tore open. The words inside bled into her like a tide breaking through defenses. She read them once, then again, then pressed the page to her chest as tears blurred the world around her. This was not the Adrian she had known. This was not the man who hid behind power and pride. This was a man stripped bare, a man confessing not with arrogance, but with grief. For the first time, she believed him. Isabella sank to her knees on the cliff's edge, the wind whipping her hair across her face. Her tears were not only sorrow now. There was something else, something fragile, almost dangerous. Hope. That night, Isabella could not sleep. The candle burned low beside her bed, shadows flickering across the cottage walls as the sea's endless rhythm echoed outside. Adrian's letter lay open on the quilt, its edges already softened from where her trembling fingers had traced the words again and again. Her heart warred with itself. One side whispered of danger. "He broke you once. He will do it again." The other voice, quieter yet more insistent, said, "This man is not the same. Something inside him has changed." Isabella rose and wrapped shawl around her shoulders, pacing the narrow room. She remembered the years of loneliness at his side, her laughter echoing into silence, her attempts at conversation met with distracted nods, her longing dismissed with cold detachment. She had built herself anew since leaving. The woman she was now did not cower, did not beg for affection, did not settle for scraps of love. But when she read his words, "I loved you. I still love you. I think I always will," her carefully constructed defenses trembled. At dawn, she walked the cliffs again, the horizon painted in fire and gold. The letter was clutched in her hand. If she returned, it would not be as the broken woman who left. It would be as someone who demanded truth, demanded respect, demanded a love that did not vanish when tested. Could Adrian give her that? Could she give him another chance? The sea gave no answers, only its endless roar. But deep inside, Isabella knew the decision was coming. She stood at a crossroads, to bury the past and remain safe in solitude, or to risk everything by stepping back into the storm she once escaped. That evening, she lit a fresh candle and pulled a sheet of paper from her desk. Her hand hovered above it, her heart thundering. Then, with a deep breath, she began to write. "Adrian." The candlelight flickered across Isabella's face as she set her pen to paper. The words came slowly at first, then in a torrent, pulled from the deepest corners of her heart. "Adrian, your letter reached me at the edge of the world. I did not expect it, and I did not expect the storm it would awaken in me. I left because your silence became heavier than any words you could have spoken. I left because I could not breathe in a home built with walls instead of windows. But when I read your confession, I saw a man I had longed to see. hidden behind armor, now laid bare. I cannot pretend your words erase the pain. They did not. But they lit something I thought had died completely. Hope. That dangerous, fragile thing. I do not know if I can trust it, or you. But I am willing to try, not for the empire, not for the world, not for appearances, but for us. Only if you can meet me as the man you showed in that letter. Honest, vulnerable, human. I will return to the city. If your heart still speaks the truth you wrote, meet me where it all began, at the old gallery, Sunday at dusk. One chance, Adrian. Only one. Isabella. She folded the letter, sealing it with trembling hands, and sent it the next morning with the village post. As the carriage carried her message away, Isabella felt the ground shift beneath her. A decision had been made. Adrian sat in his penthouse study. The city spread like a glittering tapestry beneath him. The letter lay open on his desk. Its words burned into his soul. She was coming back, but not to the mansion, not to the empire. She had chosen the gallery, the place where he had first seen her standing before a canvas, light catching her hair like fire, her eyes alive with wonder. The place where love had first brushed against him, though he had been too blind to recognize it. He spent the days in torment. Every hour felt like a year. He ignored board meetings, left contracts unsigned, even turned away investors who demanded his presence. None of it mattered now. The empire could crumble, and he would not care. All that mattered was Sunday. On that evening, he stood before the gallery's great doors, stripped of his armor. No tailored suit, no polished mask. Only a man in a simple coat, clutching nothing but hope. The gallery was quiet, its halls lit by fading sunlight through stained glass. He walked to the painting where she had stood years ago, the brushstrokes alive with color, memory, and longing. And he waited. The sound of footsteps echoed softly across the marble floor. Adrian turned, his breath catching in his throat. Isabella. She stood in the doorway, framed by the dying light. Her hair was pinned loosely, her dress simple, her face pale with both fear and resolve. For a long moment they only stared, as though unsure if the other was real. Then she stepped forward. "You came," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I would have come even if it meant waiting a lifetime," Adrian replied, his own voice breaking. They stood inches apart, the silence between them no longer heavy, but charged with possibility. "I read your letter," Isabella whispered. "For the first time I heard you. Not the man the world knows. Not the empire. You. And I need to know if that man is real, or if it was only words on paper." Adrian swallowed, his chest rising with ragged breath. "It's real, Isabella. For too long, I hid because I was afraid. But if you give me even the smallest chance, I will spend every day proving that the man in that letter is all that remains of me." Her eyes filled with tears. She reached out, her fingers trembling. And for the first time in years, he did not hold back. He took her hand, pressing it against his chest where his heart pounded wildly. "Do you feel that?" he whispered. "It has always been yours." Isabella's tears spilled freely now. "Then don't let me vanish again, Adrian. Not ever." And in that gallery where their story had begun, Adrian pulled her into his arms, not as a man desperate to possess, but as one finally ready to give. The city lights flickered beyond the stained glass, and for the first time in years, Adrian Cole did not feel like a man collapsing under his own empire. He felt like a man reborn. With Isabella in his arms, he finally understood the truth. Wealth could build empires, but only love could build a life.